Hey, coming to you from the track this morning. I'm out walking. It's about the only time I can really find time to record anything right now. I wanted to talk a little bit about law this morning. I had a friend a couple days ago ask me to clarify something on Facebook, and I kind of wrote an article about it, and I got some pretty good feedback, so I thought I'd make a video about it because, excuse me, I just, sometimes it's hard for me to understand how people don't know these things. You know, we don't learn about law anymore, it seems like, in civics classes, and it's just amazing to me people don't know this stuff. So I'm going to try to go through some of this, keep it as short as I can and simple. I want to talk about this current situation with everybody thinking, or many people thinking, that the United States Supreme Court has made a law that gays can get married, and that the Supreme Court is now trampling on, religious people's rights. Or actually, just the first half of that, we're just going to talk about the Supreme Court making laws. So let's start with what is a law. Well, I mean, you know what a law is generally. It's a rule made by the government, and it's enforceable by different means. And there are a lot of different kinds of laws, but we're kind of talking about limiting it today to statutory law. Statutory law is the law that you generally think of when you think about the law. You know, murder is against the law. Now, we all know that murder is often wrong. I mean, killing another person is wrong, unless it's self-defense or something. But there's a law against it. It's written in a book. Every state has a law against murder. There are laws against theft. There are laws. That's the kind of law we're talking about. It's the kind of law that is enacted by Congress if it's federal law, by state legislatures if it's state law, city ordinances, or city council can make city ordinances, counties can make laws, all these different levels of laws. And it's important to understand that laws generally prohibit behavior. Laws don't authorize behavior, usually. Generally, I'm out walking on the track this morning, and I don't know of any law that authorizes me to do so. You can look through the books if you want to, but I bet you're not going to find a law that says you are authorized to go walking at the track or anywhere else that you want to. And I didn't check first, but here I am. Why? Why am I able to do this? Because there's no law prohibiting it. We can do whatever we want as long as there's no law prohibiting it. Now, there are some laws on the books that sound like they authorize stuff, like authorizing to carry a weapon or authorizing to drive a car. But really, if you look at it, all they're doing is prohibiting that activity unless you meet these certain criteria, in which case you can do it. If there's a law that says you can get a concealed carry permit, what it's really doing is it's saying you can't carry a weapon, but unless you have a concealed carry permit. So it's prohibiting the behavior and then allowing it on a different level or with some conditions. We don't have to have a statute to authorize everything we do. How many statutes would there have to be? Everything you do has to be authorized? No. We can do whatever we want as long as it's not prohibited. Say that over and over to yourself till you get it. You can do what you want as long as it's not prohibited by some law. That's what laws do generally. Who makes laws? Well, for our purposes today, laws are made by Congress, state legislatures, city ordinances, county, quorum courts, or whatever. Now, for our purposes today, I'm going to say that the United States Supreme Court and the courts don't make laws. That's not exactly accurate, and I have to throw this in because if I don't, my attorney friends will barrage me with, I'm giving bad information. There is something called the common law, and the courts sort of can make laws. But I'm not going to go into that because it's not relevant here. We're talking in all this right to marry, same-sex marriage, we're talking about statutory law, and we don't need to talk about common law. You've heard of common law marriage. Where I live, there is no common law marriage, and even places where there is something called common law marriage, it's usually codified now in a statute. Usually there's a statute now that says, if you live together for so many years, you can claim to be married. So we're not going to talk about common law. for our purposes today, we're talking about the laws that are in the news right now. They're all statutory laws. Legislatures got together and made laws that said people of the same sex cannot get married. That's what we're talking about. Okay. I know that complicates things, but so who can make laws? We've gone over that. What laws can they make? Well, you've got to be able to see, I think, that there has to be some sort of a limit, right? I mean, something has to tell them, you can't just make any law. You can't make a law that, and I like to use the civil rights laws because they're recent enough and they're clear enough. A lot of you can remember some of this stuff, and even those of us that can't really remember it clearly, we've been taught about it. There were lots of laws made in the past that, you know, black people couldn't live in certain places. They couldn't use the same restrooms as white people. They couldn't drink from the same water fountains. There was a law that if a black person was sitting down on a bus and a white person got on, the black person had to give up their seat to the white person. And if you didn't do this, this was a law. If you didn't do it, you could get arrested. There was a lady that got arrested. Remember? Rosa Parks. She got arrested because she broke the law by refusing to give up her seat when a white person was standing. Now we know that if they make, generally we know that if they make a law that says, you know, black people have to sit at the back of the bus, we've learned enough to know that that's wrong, that they can't do that. They can't do that. But why? Why can't they do it? They voted on it. They got a majority vote, right? I'll promise you there are places in this country, there are towns in this country where there's no black people. Clinton, Arkansas, you know, I don't know. Where by majority vote, they could pass a law that says black people can't live in this town. They could do it. They could do it. But why don't they do it? Why can't they do it? There's got to be some reason they can't do it, or they would do it, right? There's got to be some reason that they can't make these laws. What is it? Here's what it is. It's called the Constitution. The Constitution is like a set of rules that says, you know, okay, states and cities and counties, y'all can make laws. Y'all are independent and you can govern yourselves. And when it comes to marriage and all this, that, and the other, you can make your own laws. But, hold on, there's a set of rules here you got to go by. You can't make just any law. It can't violate equal protection. It can't do this. It can't do that. Here's the rules. And here they are. It's the Constitution. All right, so there's rules. That's pretty easy, right? You can see that's necessary, right? So, who gets to decide whether or not a law violates that Constitution, whether it's a good law or whether it violates the Constitution? Well, at some point, we all got together and we decided that that entity, the people that would decide, are the courts, the judges. And ultimately, the ultimate decision is made by our United States Supreme Court. They ultimately decide. They have the last word in whether a law is a good law or a bad law. So, let's say that there's a law that says that black people and white people can't use the same restrooms. Black people have to use a separate restroom. And in the United States, you know, somebody sues, they get arrested for being in the wrong restroom. It goes up through the court system. And the United States Supreme Court says, no, that law is unconstitutional, it violates equal protection, and we strike that law down. Now, it seems that some of you would characterize that as the Supreme Court made a law that black and white people have to use the same bathroom. They didn't. They didn't make any law, okay? The Supreme Court didn't make a law. All they did was say, oh, that law you made that prohibits blacks and whites from using the same restroom is unconstitutional. You can't make that law. It doesn't follow the rules. That's all they did. They didn't make a law, okay? It's really not hard. All they did was declare that the law broke the rules set out in the Constitution. That's what they do, okay? So that's what happened here. The legislatures in different states got together and said, we're not going to allow same-sex people to get married. And some people sued, went up through all the courts, and the Supreme Court ultimately decided those laws violate the Constitution. And now, think about it. They didn't make a law that said gays, or that same-sex couples can get married. They didn't make any law at all. All they did was say, we can't make laws prohibiting that. And so, back to earlier, if there's not a law prohibiting it, you can do it. You can do anything you want as long as there's not a law prohibiting it, okay? So, that's what's happened here. And now, let's skip over a minute and let's talk about some things that it's long since been decided are protected by the Constitution. There's a lot of them, but one of them is the right to marry. It has long since been decided that almost everybody has the right to get married. There are a few people that don't have the right to get married. Little babies, 5-year-olds, they're not allowed to get married. There are laws, I presume in every state, that prohibit young babies from getting married. And those laws have withstood constitutional muster, presumably. The Supreme Court has said, yeah, that doesn't violate the Constitution. So those laws are good. You can do that. They can make those laws. But for the most part, we are we have the right to get married. It's spelled out in the Constitution, and it's been challenged a lot. There was a time when there were lots of laws in different states made saying that black people couldn't marry white people. And some people filed lawsuits and went up through the courts, and the Supreme Court ultimately said, no, that's not, you can't make those laws. That's not constitutional. People have the right to marry, and if you restrict what race they can marry, you're unlawfully restricting marriage, and they have a right to marry. So, nope, strike those laws down. And then at a different time, like prisoners weren't allowed to get married. If you were in prison, they say, I want to get married, and they're like, no, you're in prison, you can't get married. Somebody sued, went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says, They have a right to get married. It's a basic human right. And just because they're in prison, you can't take that right away. And so now, people in prison can get married. They do it every day. Now, with those laws, those two decisions I just said, blacks and whites marrying and prisoners marrying, some people, when those were passed, just like now, some people were really mad about it. Some people stood up and said, for blacks and whites to get married, it's against God's law, and I'm not going to put up with it. But they did put up with it. And they may have never gotten to like it, but they deal with it. And now, the Supreme Court has decided that people of the same sex can get married. And you may not like it, you may not agree with it, but you got to deal with it, because that's the way it is. Until you can change the Constitution or get the Supreme Court to reverse itself, which I don't see happening, you're just going to have to get to like it. And you may act like you're going to stand up and fight this tooth and nail, but you're not going to do anything that make an asseth of yourself, because you, by God, will learn to like it. If you don't, your kids will, your grandkids will. So that's how the law works.